on Crossfire. Fires in Kiev. Chaos in the Middle East. Challenges at home and abroad. But is the biggest threat to our national security something else?
In a sense, climate change can now be considered the world's most fearsome weapon of mass destruction.
On the left, Van Jones. On the right, Newt Gingrich. In the Crossfire, Joe Cirincione, who advises the State Department, and Bill Kristol, one of the president's harshest critics. Is climate change the biggest threat we face? Tonight on Crossfire.
Welcome to Crossfire. I'm Van Jones on the left.
I'm Newt Gingrich on the right. In the Crossfire tonight, two guests help us clarify John Kerry's priorities. Today, a traditional Secretary of State might have called a news conference to address at length the near civil war in Ukraine, or the challenges we face in Syria and Iraq, or Iran's nuclear program, even the problems in Venezuela. A real Secretary of State would focus on the real world. Instead, we have a Secretary of State who says the biggest threat we face is global warming. I want you to hear it again.
In a sense, climate change can now be considered another weapon of mass destruction, perhaps even the world's most fearsome mass destruction.
That statement is delusional. It's perfectly fine if you're in the U.S. Senate, which has 100 members, and any one can be randomly weird. But delusional thinking is totally inexcusable for any Secretary of State.
Well, we're going to fight today because I think it's wrong to jump on him about this. First of all, I've worked on this issue, as you know, for 10 years of my life. Climate change is a super serious issue. The Pentagon says it's super serious. The CIA says it's super serious. And I'm surprised that you, in particular, you are one of the most pro-science people in public life. Here you got somebody trying to elevate science to the global discourse. He's right to raise this stuff. And I think you're wrong to jump on him.
Look, if you read the actual speech,
which I had done,
we're not talking about his sentiments. We're talking about the speech. Okay, in a world where you have potential civil war in Ukraine, several thousand nuclear weapons in Russia, several hundred nuclear weapons in China, over 100 nuclear weapons in Pakistan, a North Korean and Iranian effort to get nuclear weapons, to suggest that global climate change is anything comparable to the threat of nuclear weapons?
Well, first of all,
I think I use the word delusional deliberately. I think it's really, literally out of touch with the real world.
Well, the Pentagon disagrees with you, and I'll tell you somebody else who disagrees with you. There's a guy named Newt Gingrich who disagrees with you. I want you to hear yourself talking about this very issue just a few years ago.
What would you say to Senator Inhofe and to others in the Senate who are resisting even the science? What's your message to them here today?
My message, I think, is that the evidence is sufficient that we should move towards the most effective possible steps to reduce carbon loading of the atmosphere.
And do it urgently, now.
And do it urgently, yeah.
Now, I love this Newt Gingrich guy. He's great. Now, I would hate, he was talking to somebody who used to be called a flip-flopper. I would hate to think that Newt Gingrich is now competing with John Kerry for the title of flip-flopper in chief.
No, not at all. The difference between a conversation, a debate that was in a Senate hearing room, talking about taking, I used the word effective steps.
Sure.
And suddenly elevating this. I'm happy to say this is a serious topic. We ought to debate seriously and look at things. To then elevate that to more important. Remember, the phrase he uses is very clear. That's why the speech matters. It's not a press release. He says this could be the biggest mass threat to the planet.
Perhaps, he says.
It's just not true.
We're going to be fighting tonight, but we got some people here to help us get through this. In the Crossfire tonight, we have Joe Cirincione, who's a member of the Secretary Kerry's actual International Security Advisory Board. We also have Weekly Standard editor Bill Kristol. I'm going to go to you first, Bill. Don't you think that if maybe Kerry went a bridge too far? Don't you think he's gone 15 bridges too far, saying the Secretary of State should resign over a line in a speech when John Kerry is out there trying to get peace in the Middle East and everything else he's doing?
Yeah, that peace in the Middle East is going great.
Well, but don't you think that this is a bridge too far?
One reason why it's not just delusional but offensive, weapons of mass destruction have been used when John Kerry was Secretary of State. They were used by Bashar al-Assad. Secretary Kerry was very upset about this. Secretary Kerry said it was a Munich moment. Secretary Kerry said we were going to go remove Assad and stop him from and destroy his weapons of mass destruction and prevent him from using them again. And then, of course, President Obama made a U-turn and we did nothing. And we have an agreement that's gotten a few, but not most of the chemical weapons out. And Assad is cheerfully in power. And 130,000 people are dead in Syria. And some of them are dead from weapons of mass destruction, from chemical weapons. And instead, John Kerry gives speeches about global climate change. It's ludicrous.
Well, first of all, I know that you're a critic of this administration. I know that you wish we had gone into war in Syria and a bunch of other places, but the Republican Party didn't support the president on a march to war. I'm asking you a specific question. Do you think that John Kerry, who has shown the kind of creativity and the kind of energy that he has shown, should lose his job because Newt Gingrich doesn't like a line in his speech?
I think he's a terrible Secretary of State.
Oh, my God.
He is terrible. My only concern about John, he's so farcical now with the peace process that's going nowhere and a bad deal on nuclear weapons with Iran, an incredible flip-flop on Syria, this speech. My only worry is that if we keep criticizing John Kerry, people will decide that President Obama's first Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, was a little bit better, which she was. She did nothing. She had no accomplishments, but she wasn't quite as delusional, and we will inadvertently help Hillary Clinton by highlighting just how bad John Kerry is. That's my main concern.
I can tell you that.
Let me put you on the spot just a little bit.
Go.
Okay? Because the central premise of my criticism and the toughness of my reaction is that a Secretary of State is very different than a senator. In that a Secretary of State speaks for the most powerful nation in the world. This is at an international event in Indonesia. And presumably the speech had been thought through, written out, and I assume he's telling us what he honestly believes, that he honestly would rank global warming as a threat that could be the greatest single threat. Now, holding him to that standard, and then we can have an argument about whether or not that, as I said, is delusional. But isn't that the right approach to a Secretary of State speech, that this is a serious state document that is designed to inform both the world and our own State Department about our priorities?
You know that in the State Department, speeches like this are cleared by dozens of people. So clearly this was well thought out. I serve on an advisory board to the Secretary of State, but my comments here are strictly my own and don't represent the U.S. government, and they're always happy when I say that. There's no question that John Kerry is right on this issue.
That's right.
Last year, when the head of the Pacific Command was asked what our single greatest threat was, he said climate change. And the reason is that the military sees climate change as a multiplier. It makes dire situations worse. It threatens fragile countries. It kills crops. It floods cities. It can destroy nations. So John Kerry is absolutely right to be in Indonesia talking about this, because Jakarta is in danger of being drowned out if the floodwaters rise as much as the Army Corps of Engineers predicts they will by the end of the century, 5 feet. That could change the planet.
You think climate change is more dangerous than nuclear proliferation?
I'm on record as saying that nuclear weapons and climate change represent the two greatest threats to our civilization.
You think climate change is really as much of a threat as nuclear proliferation?
Climate change is slow-motion mass destruction. Nuclear weapons destroy instantly. Climate change can change our planet forever.
Why do you disagree with the Pentagon's assessment on this? Listen.
One general makes a politically correct statement, knowing that the administration has a deeply... Let me ask you this.
Yes.
1997, I believe there was a resolution in the United States Senate. Should there be binding limits, as Kyoto had suggested, the climate change agreement from, what was that, 92, on carbon emissions? 95 senators agreed that, no, the U.S. should sign no treaty with binding limits. One of those senators was John Kerry. Yeah. Now he's Secretary of State. He goes around the world. He's giving speeches. What is he doing? What is he doing? Well, is he putting any pressure on China or Russia to change their policies on climate change?
They just came from China.
Oh, and he's having a great effect.
But if you ask what he's doing, go ahead. Explain what he's doing.
Tell me how much influence, how much leverage he's really willing to use.
The science is rolling in. There's more and more agreement that this is a real threat to us, that this could fundamentally change geopolitics forever. Let me give you just one quick example where nuclear weapons and global warming come together. South Asia. 135 million people live in coastally threatened areas. If the sea change rise is even close to what experts predict, those people are going to throw that continent into chaos. There's 2 nuclear weapons in India and Pakistan. You think it's dangerous now? Wait 20 years. Wait 50 years.
50 years? Could we actually focus on the fact that Iran is getting a nuclear weapon in the next 2 or 3 years?
But we are focusing on that. We're not doing one or the other. He's doing both. This is just one speech, and I'm glad he gave it.
Well, let me stay on your version of reality. First,